Welcome to Ask Truth Apologetics. I am here today to talk to you guys a little bit about the journey of Abraham and how that relates to what Muslims claim about the Kaaba and the Black Stone, and how they say that Ishmael and Hagar went to the Kaaba and set it up. So I'm just going to show you from the biblical perspective how that would be absolutely a ridiculous idea, and I also am going to forward that as kind of a bad idea, even from the Muslim perspective. So let's just kind of go through the Bible here. So, as you guys can see, Abraham is called to leave from Haran to the promised land. So in Genesis 12, 1 to 2, it says, "Now the Lord said to Abraham, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I'll make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." So if you guys pay attention here, we've got Haran. So he's going to travel around what is known as the Fertile Crescent. So he's going to wander to this direction around here where there's water and food supply, because otherwise he's going straight through desert, which is going to kill him, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So you can see out here where he kind of hung out mostly, and then you'll see way off there in the distance is the Kaaba. So we'll kind of zoom in here where he was, and then you'll kind of get a chance to look at and kind of see where all this stuff is, right? So he's going to travel right around here, and he's going to be walking all this direction down here towards modern day Palestine and Israel. So the first stop that the Bible is recorded of having him stop is at Shechem. So Abraham passed through the land of the place at Shechem to the oak of Moreh. At that time, the Canaanites were at the land. So that's Genesis 12, verse number 6. So we'll go in here, do a cool little zoom thing, I think, yeah. We'll flip it around. Kind of back it up here. So you'll see he's going to start to travel this direction to his next stop. So Abraham then travels to Bethel, or the hill country just east of Bethel. So what it says in the Bible is, "From here he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord." So that is 12:8. So he actually comes here twice. That's why I have Bethel 1 and 2. So he comes and he stays right around that spot. And then he is called to move further away into what is known as the Negev or Negeb. It just depends on what translation of the Bible you're looking at. So from the ESV, which I'm using here, "And Abraham journeyed on still toward the Negeb." So Negeb is this little box here that I created. So this general region here is known as the Negeb. So he travels there, and there becomes a famine. So he went to the closest place that would have food, which is Egypt. Where exactly in Egypt he went, I'm not sure. He does talk to Pharaoh. So here in 12:10 it says, "Now from there was famine in the land, so Abraham went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land." So when he stays there for a while, he eventually is called back and returns to Bethel. So Abraham went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, to the Negeb. Now Abraham was very rich in livestock and silver and gold, and he journeyed from the Negeb as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai. After that, he moves further south again, or I guess kind of westish, southest to Hebron. Um, so Abraham moved his tent and came and settled at the oaks of Mamre. By the way, so when he is up at Bethel, you guys may recall the Bible story where Lot, his nephew, and Abraham's shepherds got in an argument and fights, and so they decided that they were going to separate so there would be no fighting between the two. So Lot decides to go towards the Jordan Valley, the Jordan River Valley, and live near Sodom. And Abraham said, wherever you go, I will kind of go the opposite direction. So that is why he ended up here in Hebron. Now, if you guys are interested in the Bible story, that's when Sodom and Gomorrah kind of take place and all that kind of stuff. So here in Genesis 3:18, it says that he moved to Hebron and built a temple to the Lord. All right, so a whole lot of stuff goes on after he moves to Hebron. So he's promised, and as you can see where Hebron is, I'll actually make a little point here to this. So as you can see, I'll just read the story. So Abraham is told by God that he will become a father of a great nation. His wife, Sarah, or Sarai. So by the way, Abram is known as Abram until he gets a call from God, and he's known as Abraham. So sometimes I'll say Abram or Abraham. Sarah, when she becomes a mother, goes from Sarai to Sarah. So sorry if I kind of mix their names. They're the same person. God just gave them different names at different times. So his wife Sarah is barren, so she gives him an Egyptian slave girl named Hagar as her handmaid. So as you recall in the story, they did go to Egypt to sojourn, so it would make sense that they picked up a Egyptian slave girl named Hagar. So Sarah basically gives Hagar to Abraham so that he will be able to have a child with her. After that, Hagar is Sarah kind of becomes jealous of Hagar and starts to abuse her in a certain way. So Hagar is said to run away and flee towards Shur. So Shur is actually a land. I don't know if I said this or not. So Shur is basically a land just east of Egypt. So that's essentially between Cairo, where the Nile Delta is, and Israel today, Israel. So Hagar runs towards Shur, but Abraham said to Sarah, behold, so this is where the Bible actually starts to record it. So Abraham said to Sarah, behold, your servant is in your power to do to her as you please. And then Sarah dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. Then the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. So there we go. That's where it says in the Bible it was Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come and where are you going? She says, I am fleeing from my mistress, Sarah. So the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. Okay, so first thing I want to pay attention to, guys, is this is where she was, up here in Hebron. Okay? Now, someone is mean to her, so she flees. Now, if you're fleeing from somewhere, where are you typically going to flee to? You're going to flee back to your home. And as it turns out, this is exactly between, so where she ends up stopping, that is exactly between home and where she was with Abraham. So as we rotate around here, you will see that we're starting to get towards Egypt, right? So this land right over here, this is the land known as Shur. So this kind of entire region here. So she's literally going directly back home to where she came from. Okay, so she's definitely not heading out into the middle of a desert in Arabia. I can promise you that from a practical standpoint. So what the Muslim narrative might say is that she was on her way to see, or she was on her way to kind of towards the Kaaba. All right, so the angel of the Lord kind of gives her comfort. So the angel of the Lord promises that her offspring will um, they'll not be able to be numbered, essentially, right? Because there's going to be so many of them. The angel of the Lord tells her that she's going to call her son's name Ishmael, and that he will be a wild donkey of a man, and he will be against everyone, and everyone will be against him. So she called to the name of the Lord, who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." For she said, "Truly, here I have seen him who looks at me. Therefore, uh, the well," that was a typo there, "will be called Bir Roy, and it lies between Kadesh and Bir." Right? So right here is essentially where that well is, and as you can see, there is some streams and whatnot running through here, guys. So that is, and also right here is where the Kadesh is. So that is where this general region where she stopped and had that conversation with the angel of the Lord. So after Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed, Abraham goes to sojourn in Gerar. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of Negev, and lived between Kadesh and Shur. Right, so we just talked about Shur and Kadesh already. So this was about the region where he went to sojourn at. So we can kind of zoom out here, guys, and take a little 3D look at it at you. So that is about where Abraham ended up hanging out at for a pretty good amount of time. Then then Sarah gets pregnant, has a child, and from there, Ishmael is actually rude to Isaac, and that upsets Sarah. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and gave it to Hagar, putting her on the shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered into the wilderness of Beersheba. All right, so there's a whole long story behind this. I don't really need to get into it too much. You guys can take a look at it if you just read Genesis basically 12 through 22 ish. That's going to be kind of the story in which we're covering. But God basically told Abraham that he would take care of Hagar and Ishmael, and that he should listen to his wife Sarah about this. Okay, so Abraham rose early in the morning and gave them all the supplies, and they went out to Beersheba. So Hagar wanders about again, and so let's pay attention here. Okay, so he's over here in Gerar, and then she kind of wanders about in this general region, right? So we're heading somewhat into the region towards where she came from. All right, so she went up, and she sits down and starts to cry, right? Because she ends up running out of water. So she's traveling, and she ends up out here in this desert, and she's starting to run out of water, or at least thinks that she's running out of water. So what she ends up doing is she went up, she sat down opposite a good way of her child, that's Ishmael, a long distance off, about a bow shot, for she said, "Let me not look upon the death of my child." And as she sat opposite of him, she lifted up her voice and wept. Okay, so the angel of God tells her that Ishmael will be made into a great nation. So the angel of God comes and comforts her. And this is what God said. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw the well of water. So apparently the well of water had been there perhaps the whole time. Perhaps it had just appeared. The Bible does not tell us. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness, became an expert in the bow, and he lived in the wilderness of Paran. And his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. All right, so pay attention to where they are, and then we're going to move over into Paran. Okay, so not too far off, in between Egypt and where they are is where Ishmael lives, in Paran, right? So, and you also will notice that Ishmael's mother was from Egypt, and she took a wife for Ishmael from Egypt. So, just a really quick note, guys. A lot of Muslims say that they are descendants of Ishmael, and I don't particularly have a problem with that notion. Um, and there's a theory that says that Petra is actually where Muhammad is from. And if we're speaking just from a sheer geographical location, we're going to kind of start to notice that Petra is really close to Paran. And it's really close to all these locations where Abraham is located. So it actually makes more sense on a biblical stance um, that Petra would be more of an important place. So we're just going to do a real quick trip over here to Petra. This is not the main point of my lecture, but as you can see, Petra is really, really close, guys, to Paran. So if you look up over here, I don't know if you can see my mouse scroller, right there is where Paran is. Okay, so it's just a quick trip over here. As you guys are aware, I mean, Petra is a pretty awesome place. And there's, even as you can see, I'll just zoom in over here, there's actually a point of an altar of sacrifice that is located at Petra. So you can pay attention to that, guys, and you can see that, you know, if there was some sort of, I don't know, Kaaba or something like this location right around here, or actually right here, I believe. You can kind of see that. Let's see if we can zoom in on it. Would be a location where people might want to circle around a Kaaba. Okay, so there's lots and lots of historical things here, and geographical locations and sites. So this is, pretty amazing and an incredible place. But again, this is not the main point of what I'm trying to get at. But that's just a little piece of information that we might do a little bit more viewing of. All right, so Abraham is called to sacrifice Isaac. So this is kind of the final chapter of what I'm going to pay attention to, right? So he's called to sacrifice Isaac. So after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on the one of the mountains of which I will show you. So this is a very holy place in Christianity and Judaism and Islam, obviously, since the Dome of the Rock is located there near the Temple Mount. This is kind of a big deal, guys. So this is where we're going to leave off the story with, and we're just going to kind of go back and think about, what is the likelihood of all this stuff happening in Mecca. Okay, so think about this. Mecca is 12,000 to 14,000 kilometers away from any of the locations of Hagar and Ishmael and Abraham, right? So it would be a journey through mountains and desert, guys. And we're talking years and years and years ago. We're talking 3,000 years ago, where just nobody's going to be able to make that journey. So we're going to zoom out here, kind of move over, got a little bit off track here. So we're going to zoom out here, guys, so that we can see just what kind of journey it would have taken to get them up to the Kaaba. So right, so we're way over here. And as I zoom out, you're going to start to see a little bit more of the land. Okay, so can you imagine taking a journey across all of this. And just think about it. This is mountainous, desert. There's no fresh water to be found anywhere. We're talking 1,200 kilometers or more to get all the way from Jerusalem, or basically, even if we're going to think it's the closer location, which would be Paran, Gerar, Beersheba, that kind of area. It is a completely uninhabited, even to this day, and an uninhabitable area. There would be no way that anyone would be able to make that kind of journey, especially if it's just a couple of people without a whole caravan of folks. So, just to kind of finalize what I'm saying, guys, is, you know, it's really just completely, in my humble opinion, and I think just the opinion of anyone who's considering the practicality of this kind of journey, it's just unrealistic that anyone would be able to make this journey. The Bible is pretty clear. The path of Abraham makes sense. It makes sense relative to where he came from, makes sense relative to the promise of God. Where Hagar and Ishmael went makes sense. She's an Egyptian. She would be running back towards Egypt if she were to be running away. She would set up nearby. She's not going to travel 12,000 kilometers into a land that she knows nobody, nothing. There's no reason for her to go down there. So those are the types of things that I want us to think about. All right. So that's pretty much all I have for you guys today. Please leave your likes, comments, any questions that you might have. I'll be happy to look into. I am definitely not a geographer or ancient historian. This is just all the information that I could gather through my internet searches. So if you guys have any corrections on location, I'd be happy to discuss that with you. Until then, guys, thank you so much for watching, and God